Hello everyone, this is Britton here with Blue Manor Academy. Okay, today I just got back from a trip. We drove through the night, so I've been out for a long time. You can see I look sunken, I'm tired. I didn't shave, but I wanted to get on here. It's so important to be consistent with you guys, keep encouraging you guys. I know you guys are out there and you're asking me questions on Facebook and stuff. I'm not responding as quickly because I've been in the car driving and it was a crazy week. I'm gonna explain what happened, where I went in just a second. But I want to just really quickly take today and answer a few of the questions that you guys have been asking that I haven't really maybe responded to properly. One, what happened to the Academy? Well, you probably saw it got updated. It looks a lot better, hopefully, but some of your progress bars disappeared. That wasn't supposed to happen. It did happen in a trial run that we did, but I was told that it was just going to happen on my admin account, and then I guess it did happen to everybody. So we're fixing that. Don't worry, your kid can get in there. I believe if they take a test or they mark another book complete or something like that, it's supposed to remember, go back and remember and retroactively update that book. But unfortunately, you have to do it book by book, and that's not ideal. And your kids are going to be really disappointed. They want that progress. It's not the end of the world if we can't get it back, but we should be able to get it back. Don't worry. But the coders should be able to fix that, hopefully, by the end of the week here. So that's what's happening there. And there's always going to be bugs when you're coding something. As we're trying to make this better, it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride. I appreciate you guys sticking through it with us and letting me know actually right away if there's something wrong with the site. If you see something, jump on Facebook and shoot me a message so we can get that dealt with, because that's just going to be part of the process of building an incredible site. It's going to take a lot of iterations. So that's question one. The next question, I think it came from Jenna. Jenna's been reading the books, Education. And I talk about how the classics are a great education. You know, reading them is the essence of great education. I want to go back and change that now. The more I've researched about the classics and stuff, I want to say great books are an elite education. And it's really important because, you know, we talk about in the book how so many people, they just get caught up in this idea that, oh, your kids should just be reading. They just read. It's so important to read. And then your kids are reading like Goosebumps and, that's entertainment. That's like watching a movie. It's different than watching a documentary, let's say. It's not as educational. So there are books that have withstood the test of time. They're just phenomenal books. They introduce these amazing ideas into the world. And some of these books are thousands of years old and nobody's outdone them. They've just stood the test of time. That's what I talk about with the classics, these great books. These are the books your kids should be reading. So Jenna was asking, where do I get this list? Like, I want to follow this method. Are they on Blue Manors Academy? The short answer is yes and no. So yes, we are putting the classics, many of them, onto Blue Manors Online Academy. And so you can get a lot of those, especially some of the novels and the children's stories and stuff. Some of the classics are going to be a little bit over their head. They're books on philosophy and mathematics and stuff like that are going to be for a higher level. And as we continue to grow this and we get into the higher grade levels, we'll probably start introducing some of those classics. We also have to, like I said in the book, handle them carefully, because some of these books are powerful, especially some of the philosophy, and they're not necessarily on our side, and we need to do battle with them. We need to introduce our children to them so we can wrestle with them, but we have to be very careful because they're potent books, and if we're not careful, they can seduce our own children away. The other thing is I have to go back and read some of these books. So when I read a lot of these classics as a kid in high school or in college, and even just past years, I don't think I had really formed my worldview. I didn't really understand what was going on in the world. And so I'm just reading these things with a blank slate. I don't realize many of them have an agenda. And the more I started reading the classics, I started to discover something interesting. Many of them, excuse me, my throat. My wife hates that when she wants to be like, don't clear your throat. I'm like, I can't talk. I have like an allergic reaction or something. So anyway, sorry. So I'm starting to discover that there seems to be this political agenda in many of the classics. And I'm suspecting that some of these classics, especially during the Enlightenment, are famous books and have been made famous on purpose because they have a certain agenda. For example, I remember in school, one of my teachers, this is actually prep school, Colonel Hardy, he was an amazing English teacher, super, super hard. Almost broke my back, my will to write with sentence trees. Very hard. But he was reading Herman Melville, said it was a great book, Moby Dick. And I remember, I've always wanted to read that book. And so I went back and I was actually reading it on the trip, and I had a blank slate. I didn't know anything about Moby Dick. I didn't know why it was such a great book. And so far, I'll just be honest with you, it's okay. There are parts. I mean, there's certainly some description, some writing that's incredible. I'm not really drawn into the story, but it really right away, I realized, wait a second, now I get it. I see why this is probably in the classic. It follows that kind of Enlightenment doctrine. It starts off with the narrative of the noble savage, and there's this little guy, he kind of becomes like a sidekick to the main character, Ishmael, and he's a native and he's a pagan, and they start introducing these ideas that it's all the same, or maybe even the pagan is more noble, the noble savage, and it's really this hypocrisy that comes from the Christian world, and so you have some of that kind of infused into this, and it makes me wonder because it keeps fitting the agenda. Every time I read a classic and I go back, even from my childhood, and I read like War and Peace and stuff, which is an incredible book. One of my favorite books that I've ever read. I read that in my senior year at high school, just on my own, wasn't assigned. Amazing book, War and Peace, challenging book. But now that I've learned so much about history and this agenda and stuff, I go back and read it, and it's talking about the Freemasons. At the time, I'm just like, oh, the Freemasons are these great, good people, and now I can go back with fresh eyes. I'm like, oh, there's that agenda, it's there. So anyway, my point is that I'm trying to reread a lot of these classics before I put them on there. Eventually I want to have a rating system to warn parents, like, here's what's in the book, here's kind of the false ideologies that they're teaching in this book, and here's how we're going to wrestle with them. So I want that there. And then some of these books that I'm going to introduce, like Plato's Republic, that's a dangerous book. It's a powerful book. It's an interesting book, but it certainly teaches some bad ideas. And so I want to wait till kids are old enough to handle that, and I can properly teach it. I want children to understand when they hear it, like, this sounds incredible, here's the counter arguments and stuff, if that makes sense. Plato's Republic is really relevant, for example, for classics today, because if you look at the Enlightenment, it's really just reintroducing these ideas that came from Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic, it's funny because we think of like liberty and freedom and all this stuff with the Republic, but you read Plato's Republic, you get a really dirty feeling for republics. It's about tyranny. It's about controlling the masses. It's really an interesting book, and that's the form of government that we have. So, and it's funny because in the book too, he's like, they need to think that they have this sense that there's this fairness and equality to society. They need to believe that they have like an equal vote, kind of like an equal say. He talks about having these lotteries, like an election that's all rigged, but the people need to believe that they're just unlucky every time that they don't win and stuff. It's so relevant to today. That's Plato's Republic. That's thousands of years old. So our kids need to read it. They need to be aware that that's out there. We don't want to shelter them from that, but we also don't want them being seduced by it. So anyway, that's a short. Yeah, the classics will be on our site. Some of them are over your kid's age level. Your kid doesn't need to start reading Plato's Republic at 3 years old. We will maybe talk about that on the site and start introducing it, especially in the Master Talks, which will be coming soon, which I'll be teaching. But we want to be able to screen some of the concepts, not just the concepts, but some of the, the subject matter is maybe heavy. So we're putting that together. The classics that I have on there so far, I like. I think that they're great classics. One example of one that I would like to kind of rate is Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn is probably some of the greatest American writing ever. I think that is my favorite American novel. Maybe that and Gone with the Wind, but they're different styles of story. But Huckleberry Finn's phenomenal. But there's a lot of racial language in it. And if you know the story, it's actually written to kind of condemn slavery and kind of show this hypocrisy of it. But so there's a lot of sarcasm and stuff that's added like that. So he's actually on your side. He's actually an abolitionist when he writes the book. But the problem is that language is so strong. Or for example, he uses the N-word. It's really important. And I tell my kids, like, we don't use that word anymore. It's become very derogatory. Back in the day, I believe it just comes from the Latin and it just means black. And so they would just refer to people with the N-word. But we read that today, we think, oh my God, that's so horrible. Why would they say that? That's so horrible and racist and stuff. And we get really offended. Well, at that time, it didn't really mean that. It would be like calling someone an African-American today. And so, for example, but our kids can't hear that language and then think that it's okay to use it. And so I'm trying to say, well, should I edit that? Because technically the language has changed. It doesn't mean that anymore. It's not this kind of this friendly way to address and say, hey, it's an African-American guy. And if our kids hear that language, what if they go out and use it? And is it true language? Because the meaning of the word, the connotation of the word has changed. So that really wasn't what the author meant at the time. He didn't want it to be this racially derogatory word. So would it be better to exchange it with a word like African-American so that it actually has a better intention of the meaning? So anyway, this is all stuff that I'm wrestling with, but the classics are coming. That's a really long answer to a short question. The classics are coming. Many of them are on Blue Manor Academy. Most of them that are in the curriculum are G. They're books that I recommend, like The Velveteen Rabbit, just a fantastic story. Every kid should read it, right? There's nothing controversial, I don't think, about that book. Some of the ones that are a little bit more controversial, like Huckleberry Finn, they're in the library. Your kids should read it. Just be forewarned that some of those will be PG. And we're going to be coding a rating system so I can say parental guidance. And here's what you need to know about this book so that you can maybe just sit down and talk to your kid before you read it. Like, hey, for example, they use this N-word to talk about African-American people. And if you use that today, it's very derogatory. You're going to upset people. It's a racial slur now. And just explain the difference, how, that word, you could even talk about history, how the South used to be Spanish, and you talk about Texas and California stuff. That was all under Spanish rule. And so that they used, of course, the Latin. And so they're really just saying a black person. And it wasn't necessarily derogatory. I think that's really important to talk about. So that rating system is coming for the classics. And then again, like I said, a lot of these classics are for older kids. We want to introduce our children to it as early as possible, give them an advantage. So probably when we start doing middle school, we'll start introducing these classics in a real way. But for elementary school, your kid's going to struggle to read some of the classics, Herodotus' history. Although I think it's fascinating. And there are some really cool stories. And we're trying to introduce, like, maybe we do like a children's version of Herodotus' histories. And then just to kind of whet the appetite, get him used to it, get him used to the names and the stories. And then we introduce him to the real thing a little bit later. So anyway, all of that's in the work. Okay. And then the last question, where was I last week? It's actually really interesting. So all of a sudden, like you probably saw, I jumped on here and I said, hey, I'm leaving in a few minutes. There's a snow coming down. We're going on this trip. This trip was last minute. And it is tied to what we're doing with Blue Manor Academy. For a long time, I said, listen, I want there to be an actual hub. You know how like Disneyland, or Disney, they have their studio, and then they have this wonderful world and all this stuff. And I said, for a long time, we've been looking for the Manor, the Blue Manor, and it'll probably change locations as our success and our staff and all that stuff grow. But for a long time, we've been looking for the Blue Manor. And so I have these houses that we've been saving, and I'm starting to sell off my rental properties so that we have some more money to actually buy a bigger, and I want it to be a family home. I want it to embody this entire movement. So it'll be a family home. It needs to be big, so we have the studio. We can run the business out of it. You guys are probably like, hey, sometimes when you're ordering books, like, oh, it's taking a little bit longer. Yeah, because I don't have the books. I have to have Amazon store and print the books for me because I don't have a huge warehouse. So I've been looking for some sort of facility that fit the mode or the model of this idea of this academy, this Blue Manor Academy. And this one house, I've been following for a long time, and they dropped the price significantly, and it's huge. It'd be perfect for what we're doing. And it has a huge area for a studio. I could even do conferences out of it. It's amazing, right? And they dropped the price. And then I was like, oh, cool. I'm waiting on pre-approval because I got to get my taxes done, all this stuff. And then it went pending. So I was like, oh, I lost it. And then all of a sudden, it went from unpending to back on the market because I guess the sale kind of fell through. And we had just gotten our approval stuffed on our taxes. So I said, dude, we're jumping in the car right now. We're leaving in 2 minutes or an hour. As the snow is starting to come down, we got to get out of here. We ran all the way to a state, I'll tell you where later. And we looked at this, what will hopefully be the Blue Manor. And we put an offer in. I'll tell you what happens with it. We may not get it or not. But if I do, it's amazing. We'll have a huge studio to record in. And we'll have a place to ship our books and print the books, and it's going to be amazing. And it'll be like that center, the Blue Manor. We could even do some conferences out of it and stuff. It'd be really cool. So anyway, that's where I was. And so it was an adventure. We just jumped in the car and we ran. And then we drove back and we drove through the night, and I just got home. I took a little nap, and I'm jumping on here. So if everything is chaos today, I'm back. And I just wanted you to know kind of what was going on. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to dump you guys and take a family vacation. It was actually part of the movement. It was me looking to see how we grow it, because it's really hard to grow this thing from living in the woods, in the mountains, and the internet doesn't work, and I don't have access. I need to be closer to a city. I don't have access to illustrators and facilities to do promotions or conferences if we wanted to someday. So we're looking not to ever lose a family farm. Like, we'll always keep this. It's always going to be special to my family. We talked about it. That's also part of the movement, family property. We'll talk about that in the next book, Power. But we want a way to grow this thing rapidly for you guys. So anyway, that's where I was. And at the end, I never know how to end it. I always end up rambling. Next week, I want to actually talk about something different that's actually relevant to parents. And I'm realizing more and more, it's not just about the kids. It's about coaching you guys, the moms, the parents. And I realize a lot of you guys are feeling maybe insecure. You're not up to it, or you want this for your kids. You want the greatness movement for your kids, but you're not feeling up to the task. Maybe you're feeling like a little bit of a hypocrite. And I'm going to address that next week. And the point is, like, so often we're told you have to lead by example, which means you have to be great first. You have to achieve and lead the way. Some of that's true, but it's not actually true. It's not completely true. Michael Jordan still has a coach, and he's better than his coach, but that coach is still necessary. And it's not the coach being a hypocrite because the coach doesn't shoot 500 layups a day or whatever Michael Jordan would do, right? Back in the day, basketball. They have a different purpose. Your purpose as a coach, a facilitator, you have not been wired for greatness. I'm just gonna end up doing the whole speech right here. Anyway, I'll be talking about that next week. It's really important that you guys get that right. Like you may not be able to achieve what your kids achieve, then that's okay. And if you talk to your kids and you set it up the right way, they're not gonna look at you as a hypocrite and say, well, mom said, sit up straight. She doesn't sit up straight. Or, well, mom said not to use that word, but she used that word. And if you're not careful, your kids will discredit you and see you as a hypocrite. But if you approach it a certain way, you can just dispel that. And actually, it's more empowering for your kids. They realize that you're here to empower them. You want them to be better, greater than you. And they have advantages that you don't have. You were not raised for greatness, but they will be. So anyway, I'll probably talk about that next week, even though I already got into it today. Thank you guys so much for following us. If you guys have questions, your questions are always the priority. Sorry, last week was a little crazy. I'm sorry this week's crazy. But things are happening rapidly. With the site rollout, we have lots of coders rolling out new sites. We're going to get some bugs and stuff, but it's happening. It's growing. This movement is happening. So it's exciting. And you guys are enthusiastic. A lot of you guys are texting me, messaging me. You're super excited. You're trying to figure out how to implement this stuff, but you bought in. And that's okay. It's going to be a journey. It's going to be a journey. We're going to be doing this as we go. And it's a necessary journey. It has to happen. But don't be discouraged by it. It's not perfect. You don't have to be perfect tomorrow. We're still working things out in my home. There's things that I write about in this book, and I'm like, man, if I just had the time, I could follow this perfect. It might just be perfect, right? But I don't always. And there's more things that I talk about that I can't get done, and that's okay. I'm bringing my kids closer. On that first step, I'm setting my kids up for greater success. They'll stand on my shoulders. If you read the book, they'll stand on my shoulders, and they'll be higher. They'll reach higher, and then their kids will be able to stand on their shoulders, and they'll reach higher. And so that's okay if we don't achieve everything that we set out. We have this great vision for our kids and for our future and for our family and for our faith. We have this great vision. It's okay if we don't see it in a generation. It's like Moses, he didn't get to enter the promised land, but he was a step. He brought his people to the doorstep, right? And achieved this great thing. And so I'm okay if I'm the threshold of this. I'm okay if I'm the kind of the doormat and I bring my kids and then they enter this, this great thing. That's okay. It's generational. Greatness isn't seen. You see these guys like Elon Musk stuff. It seems like they just prodigies out of nowhere. I'm talking about this in the next book, Power. You think of Julius Caesar. He's just this anomaly, just born out of nothing, and he achieves greatness at one time. Not at all. It's a process. He comes from the family, the Julii. He's a powerful family. His family has set him up for this moment, okay? And that's what we're doing for our children. We're setting them up for greatness, to make a difference in the world, to be world leaders, to change the course of history. And sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 generations. Hopefully not. I want to see it happen in my lifetime. And I tell myself with technology and all this stuff, like we can speed it up, it can happen. It may not. But that's okay. Like I have faith in what we're doing, and it's okay if I have to watch it from heaven and be like, sweet, they did it. I will see it, even if I'm not here on earth for it. So anyway, all right, guys, I will talk to you next week. Ask questions. Questions are always the priority. Please continue to have faith. The site is getting better. It's a process. It's moving rapidly, even though you don't see it on the front end. The back end, people are hustling. We're building this thing as fast as we can for you guys. Thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you next week.